Some new faces, some regulars. It feels funny holding the mic, but I hope this way people in the back could hear me a little bit better. In trying to come up with a topic, a theme to discuss, to share on the Dhamma, is, for me at least, somewhat a little bit difficult, and in a fun way difficult, because I try to come up with what is the most relevant theme or themes that I could touch upon and share with you. And like Bhante was saying, I have been very concerned recently with preservation. Preservation, we have a very compelling need to preserve certain things. One of them, for example, recently, the Amazon. We don't, it's shocking. And it's just one simple example of a lot of other things that are going on in the world today that are definitely going to affect, and is affecting, everyone now and for many generations. So there will be deprivation if this continues. So along the theme of preserving or preservation, the closest thing to my heart is the Dhamma. It's a fun journey. It's a wonderful exploration to be discovered every single day, every single moment that we have. To know that we're so fortunate to still have the Dhamma in whatever version that has reached us, in fact. However, in talking about the Dhamma, it's always clear, it's necessary for us to clarify what we mean by the Dhamma. As a student of religion for many years in the university settings, or talking with teachers, sitting at the feet of many bhikkhus, it's at one point or another it shows up. Okay, what is the differentiation between the two things? Because sometimes there's some anomalies between what is religion, what is spirituality. There's so much rites and rituals connected with the practice that we take it for granted that it is the practice. Meanwhile, it is not. It's just a human thing that comes in. And I was reminded of what happened right after the Buddha died. Many of the bhikkhus that were newcomers, who had an issue with following so many precepts, it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to break away. In fact, one old monk who had recently joined the Sangha, who knew, he actually heard the voice of the Buddha. When he found out that the Buddha had died, he rejoiced. He was like, and we saw the other monks, other bhikkhus who had not become arhants, so they were not completely detached from the sense of sadness and the sense of loss. He turned to them and was like, why are you guys crying? This is a celebration. The old man is no longer going to be boss us around. Imagine the audacity. Imagine, and this is an older person. And this was only one example of what ensued after the Buddha's death. Some people just did not accept the fact that he died. How could he? This is the Buddha. It's impossible. Because they were coming from a culture that wanted to deify, to turn this entity into a divine being, something that is beyond, is an absolute. And we find that pretty much in every single denomination that followed within the Buddhist tradition. the Venerable Mahakassapa, hearing this old man, this old monk, celebrating, didn't say a word, but he knew what had to be done. Immediately he spreads the word that there needs to be a council, the first Sangha council, that put all of the teachings in, it codified them. They collected all of them. That's where we get, a very short while after the Buddha's death, we have the first Sangha council. And to that event, which lasted months in preparing the suttas, codifying them, all the Pali Nikayas that we get, is because of that council. In a sense, we need to be thankful to that old guy, that the one that was celebrating, because that was the instigator that allowed us to have what we have today as the Dhamma. But we got to dig around. We've got to dig around for it, because as you know, right after the death, the demise of the physical death of the Buddha, the death of the Buddha, for all intents and purposes, Buddhism took on this cultural garb. It took on so many different textures and flavors of cultures wherever it went. So it went to Central Asia, it went to Southeast, to Sri Lanka, it took on the Sri Lankan garb. It went to China, it took on the Chinese way of thinking. Taoism, for example, very mystical, this and that. So that was squeezed in along with the emperor king. He was now associated with the Dhamma. It went to Central Asia, it took on Manichaeism, it took on Zoroastrianism, it took elements from the Mesopotamia like Ishtar or Ashtarut, from where we also ended up with Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva ideal. All of these things got merged. And then you go to Korea, you go to Japan, you have now elements of Shintoism. You have Confucianism from China going in, and then eventually developing into what we have as Zen. All of these things are wonderful colorations of what the Dhamma is, is unique in getting. It takes on all these wonderful things, but we have to also acknowledge that underneath all these garbs is, or could be, if we look for them, the teachings of the original teachings, as close to the originals as we can get. And that's why we need to go back when we talk about preservation. And by the way, during the last 50 or 60 years, I didn't mention the West. So we have all of these elements taking place, and I talked about psychology or psychotherapeutic modalities that are trying to, get their piece of the pie, as it were, getting their mindfulness bit in there, stealing some principles and saying, aha, this is it, this is a new modality, and there it goes, I'm presenting a new certification program, there you go. And you have to pay an arm and a leg, by the way, to get it. Meanwhile, it's like an ingredient. I tell my students, it's an ingredient in a grandmother's recipe of the most delicious pie. But it's just an ingredient. Mindfulness. It has so many elements of the teachings missing. As a psychotherapist, I know people have been coming back, and I would hear other therapists talking about, yeah, but the symptoms came back 6-7 months later. I was like, yeah. Did you incorporate any elements of sila, discipline? Any elements of Brahma Viharas? Any compassion, empathy that we talk about? Did the patient see that in your character? Or did they just see you as just another quote-unquote client? The moment your session's over, it's like, okay, next. All these things are relevant to the practice, and that's where we need to come back. When we mention the word preservation, preservation of the Dhamma, it's all about practice. Because unlike other quote-unquote religions, Buddhism as such, when we're going back to the original, and unfortunately there is no country, as far as I can tell, that has necessarily the original. It is going to come out in your practice. Yes, some cultures, some countries are blessings, as far as I'm concerned, in at least having the material. The suttas, for example, they've kept it. I love the way, for example, especially the Sri Lankan monks and nuns recite the suttas, and I fell in love with it years ago when I heard Bhante Ratnasara, my first teacher, recite some suttas. I was like, whoa, I don't understand a word. But it's beautiful. Let me learn this. Let me study this. However, we need to distinguish between the religious part, rites and rituals. Last week, for example, we had a wonderful ceremony here of the Ulambana ceremony. It's all about rites and rituals. But sometimes we get confused. We think that is the Dhamma. It's not. It's not. Coming to a temple once a week, or even doing once a month of a retreat, fine, yeah, sure, it's better than nothing. It can kind of allow you to get back into focus, the North Star or the compass. Okay, you got your bearings. But then what do? That's when it gets to be practice, which takes us into the spiritual realm. It's nothing funky, it's today with the didactic reasoning and extreme materialism and again, I get these people coming in and say, well, you don't necessarily believe in the afterlife, right? Rebirth, this nonsense. It's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of practice, and again, we go back to the original teachings and it's there. The Buddha didn't make missteps, misrepresentation of the Dhamma. They weren't cultural nuances that were added later. They were part and parcel of the teachings. Kamma, rebirth, which when taken out of the context, which by the way, the Dhamma is very contextual. That's what allows it to take on the different garbs of different cultures so easily. Kusala, you remember when Dr. Guruge used to say this phrase, Reverend Kusala and I go back, and he would say, Buddhism is that one restaurant that serves any kind of meal, any kind of day, any time of day. And I was like, that's interesting. I mean, yeah. And this was coming from a person who was like a living library of knowledge of when it comes to all the commentaries, etc. But anyhow, preservation, context, and which allows us to look at the Dhamma in a different way other than the other religions have. For example, there's always an emphasis on one particular group in other traditions, other religious practices. My job here is not to kind of downplay others, but it's just to point out the facts about the Dhamma being so focused on the human element. It does not cut us off from our fellow human being. In fact, not even a fellow human being only. Everything else, the environment, other species. For example, it's not a strange thing to find a Dhamma teacher, or forget about the Dhamma teachers, just take, you remember the context part of the Dhamma? Take any bit of the teachings, and let's say we fast forward into the future, and let's, indulge me here, let's just say other species show up, aliens for example. If I belong to a religion, if I practice a religion that says only my people, we're the good ones because of this God. Or if you do these 5 things in a day, that makes you qualified to be separate. The other people, forget about them. Or whatever. If you have faith in this, then you're good to go. Those species are going to have a hard time accepting that. How will our practice be rooted on the Eightfold Path? That's what dictates the future of the Dhamma. If you can just take that today, from today's talk, I think that's compelling enough for me. Just the Eightfold Path. It has nothing to do with nationality, with race, with gender, with anything you can think of that identifies a person, an entity, to be this way. There's room for everybody. If we can only take on what we mean by the Eightfold Path. Right speech, what is that? In fact, I don't like to use the word right, because what is right for me might not be right for you. There's that whole dichotomy. My teachers also, they've come up with another qualifier, harmonious. Harmonious communication, starting with the one that you have between your ears most of the time. What kind of communication is that? Is it negative? Do you have a list, a slew of adjectives that you use to put yourself down? Most people do. How about we change that? How about we start, because that's where you're going to be stemming from any time you look at somebody else. That's the verbiage, that's the series of vocabulary terms that we're going to use while addressing each other. However, if there is harmonious communication going on in your mind with yourself, by the way, that's the closest person you're ever going to find, then there will be communication. There won't necessarily have to be any fights and trying to argue, because you're going to be able to see and practice what we talked about briefly, empathy. Because it becomes a living embodiment of your actions, your activities. And that's why whenever people saw the bhikkhus, or even the upasakas and upasikas, the lay people within the Sangha community of the time of the Buddha, people saw them to be different than other people. And remember, India still is a hub for like anything spiritual. Quasi, non-quasi, it doesn't matter, but especially at the time of the Buddha. You had the Shramanas that were coming down, that were challenging the Vedic tradition, the Brahmanic tradition, which the Buddha actually at one point for about 6 years, he followed. The Shramanas or the ascetics that challenged the status quo, the Rig Vedas, all the Upanishads, etc. So, these individuals, the bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, upasakas, and upasikas at the time of the Buddha, they were doing their best to try to follow the teachings, and when it comes down to just the Eightfold Path, that's the simplest way to do it. I remember years ago, around the time, like 25 years ago, this was like my first proper, or education proper I was getting in the Dhamma. Bhante Ratnasara was sitting there, Reverend Karuna was there, and Reverend Karuna said, just to narrow it down, she had a personality, just to narrow it down, the Dhamma is all about 3 things. If you forget all of it, just remember these 3 things. Okay, I'm all ears. Don't do anything bad, evil. Do things that are good, and purify the mind. Boom. End of story. I was like, that's a perfect punchline. That's like a perfect soundbite. If somebody asks me what is it that you're practicing, If you can just take it, it's a very simple simplification, or rather, of the Eightfold Path. So preservation of the Dhamma. In the Dhammapada there is the Vagga, or the verse, or Sutta if you want to call it, where the Buddha says, in the unessential they find, or they look for, or they identify, quote unquote, the essential. In the unessential they find the essential. And when they look at the essential parts of life, they see it as unessential. This is a perfect example of our situation today in the world. Perfect example. Matches it. We're looking at things, and if you've listened to any of my talks, you've heard me speak about any of the themes, you always see that this is the common denominator. We're missing out, folks. We're missing out on whatever it is that is essential. Yesterday I was at a friend's house, and his wife just died 2 days ago. You see him, and he's in his 50s. They've been together for almost, actually, over 20 years, 27 years or so. And the man is just at a loss. He's crying, he's hugging me, it's all that, and and I look at him, but I know he's not ready for the Dhamma. So I have to use a language that can be both compassionate, understanding, and at the same time, hopefully, giving him possibly tiny little crack in the wall type of a perspective change, maybe. And I said, look around you. All of us, do you see here, all gathered here that are, to support you, to give you, just the sense that you're not alone. He's like, yes. I said, we're all going to die. Every one of us. He looked at me. Yeah, I know that. No. I said, try to take that in, that image. You see that, your daughter? She's going to die too. You saw my parents, right? Because he knew my parents before they died. They're dead. Meanwhile, I also know how they and everybody else, majority of us as humans, we're rushing to extract as much pleasure as we can out of life and calling that happiness. Nope. Pleasure and happiness don't go hand in hand. Happiness does not depend on the maximization of pleasure. It doesn't. You might even have pain. Any of you meditating know what I'm talking about. There is pain. But what do you do with that? Are we attached to the pain? Yes, it's going to be havoc. It's going to be, it's not going to be a good session. You're going to fight with your knees, with old age. Or we can see it for what it is, perhaps readjust the body and then come back to the meditative process. But essentially, I was seeing the situation where this person feels like he's at a loss now. His companion is gone and nothing's going to bring her back, yes, and he's going to be tormented for the rest of his life. Some of us have been lucky enough to actually hear the Dhamma and see something of the essential in the unessential factors that we see constantly around us. And say, I wonder if there's more to life than just finding a mate, finding this career, doing this that gives me pleasure, having all these hobbies, the ability to speak 600-700 languages, I don't know. Making so much money you don't know what to do with it, etc. Traveling to every tiny little inch around the world, giving me pleasure. But sooner or later, death is right there. And that's what I was trying to hint at. Maybe not hint, just use a bulldozer for him to see. There's death. But when we're with our loved ones, we're constantly saying, hey, let me put that on the shelf right now. Let's just enjoy the pleasure. Let's go and, let me get that Gucci bag, or let me get that car. Let me go to Bali. Let me do a weekend retreat. Yes, I'll post some pictures on Instagram. Oh, yes. And that's going to give me tremendous happiness. All of those things, unessential as far as the Dhamma goes. How are you dealing with the suffering that's happening? Because, the Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths, and we hear about it. It's almost like a mantra. Some of us might even have it tattooed, either physically or in our brain. But so long as we don't understand that suffering itself is attachment, they're not two things. Attachment is suffering. Suffering is attachment. What do I mean by that? You try to hold on to something. This friend of mine I just mentioned, he said something else. He said, she left me burning. Those were the words he said. She left me burning. Not with spite, not like he hated her. No. He's burning out of love because he lost her. Any one of us here who've lost friends know what he's saying. And I said, holding on to the fire, let me just say it's like me doing this fist. And the fire is in my grip. It's going to burn me. But as long as I have it like this, it's going to burn me. Yes, absolutely. Unless I do this. Yes, it's still going to have its burn marks on me. But it won't burn me further. Attachment. Me not getting that job after working so hard for it is attachment. And every time my friends see me, they will say, why do you look upset? Well, no, I'm fine. Meanwhile, I know I'm burning up because I didn't get what I wanted. That is attachment. Why? Why is it bad? The only question we need to ask ourselves is, am I suffering? Period. Just, am I suffering? Remember, suffering itself was not and is not the noble truth. The Buddha talked about Four Noble Truths, right? Suffering itself, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it's something bad. So it's not noble per se. It's the understanding, the seeing of suffering, as the painful aspect, that we have to have a position towards that. What do we do with the suffering? Am I just going to gulp it down and say, hey, c'est la vie, let's go forward with it? Or why? That's why, to me, the Dhamma is the most curious path. It's very scientific in that regard. Why? Why do I have to suffer again? What's the causes behind it? Just the very question of that, why is there suffering? What is this? Is the noble truth. Because everybody knows what suffering is. There is suffering. And then to dig more further and further to find out more as to where this is stemming from, and then finding out that it is my attachment to things. Now we're getting onto something. So as long as we maintain that connection with real life through our own pains and dissatisfactions. By the way, these words, dissatisfaction, suffering, some teachers have called it stress, they're all so delimiting, they're so inadequate when you see the word dukkha. Because the word in Pali, dukkha, is so like multifaceted. It could take so many different shapes. That's why we don't have an equivalent word for it in any of the languages that I've come across, non-Pali or non-Sanskrit. So we have to make do and use several different, let's say in this case, English words. But where's that one thing? I'm inviting you to come back to your life, your living experience, and go from there. And that, to me, to my understanding, is one of the ways that we can ensure that there is the preservation of the Dhamma. And we have to really take care of it. Pariharana is a word in Pali. It means taking care, to protect. Imagine a loved one who has a tiny little sharp thing lodged in their eye that you catch, you see. How do you approach it? Do you just let them wallow in it? Do you just let them suffer? Or do you approach and you try to pluck that thing out, that very uncomfortable, painful thing out? And how do you do that? Do you use compassion, love, empathy, care, precision, intentional action, determination, tolerance? All these things, right? That's what I'm inviting you to have as far as a deliberate connection with the Dhamma. Have the other stuff, have the cultural elements, they're fun. But go back to the source, know what it is. Know what it is, and how is it relevant to you? Bells and whistles, they're fine. Rites and rituals are beautiful, yes. But the practice, how well is it reducing my level of suffering? That's the litmus test. And that's what I will leave you with and open up to questions, Bhante. Yes, Omero. And then Isaac.
Thank you for your talk. I'm not sure how to phrase this, but I'm not sure how to phrase this. How can I not get confused by false happiness until I get to the real thing? By that I mean, if I get to go to Bali, I will feel happy. If I get the promotion, I will feel happy. And because I don't have the true happiness yet, it's very easy for me to get bogged down by the job, the partner, the house, the car, vacations, the fun, the drinking, And even if I know intellectually this isn't real, right? I don't have that true happiness yet. It's easy for me to get, confused or pulled off the path because it's so immediate and tangible. And the true happiness, I'm not there yet. I don't know when I'll get there. It feels like very far down the road for me. So, but in the meantime, I can see how it can be very easy to get lulled into, feeling happy if I get to go to Bali, which would be great. I would feel pretty happy about that.
If you're sick and you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you a prescription, and the doctor says, you take this, it's some type of a skin condition or whatever. You take this, it's going to be gone. But you got to follow the directions, right? And you go ahead and you take that prescription, you go to Kinko's, you magnify it, you make it laminated, and it's about, 8 by 10 or something huge, feet, by the way. And you carry it over your head. I have the cure for my illness. To me, that is very similar to what you just said. Now, is that person going to be cured? Remember, they have the prescription, the paper, over their head. Is that the cure? Are they curing themselves? They're not. So similarly, when you read about the Dhamma, when you say you're practicing the Panchasila, the 5 precepts, when you say you do all the rites and rituals, right? So it's very superficial. Because why? Because you're waiting for the cure to take place, to happen sometime in the future. Because you started it. You have the prescription. Come on, you went to the doctor. You paid the copay. Deductibles, everything is paid for. So it should kick in any day now. No. The practice. That's what I mean. On the way to Bali, you're going to hit your toe somewhere. you're going to lose a baggage, or something's going to happen. The stewardess, the flight attendant is not going to give you what you wanted. All the da 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 da. You get to Bali, it's not the right room you wanted. All these things are opportunities for you to practice. Although you're in Bali, yes, you go over there, it's like, the beach is not that interesting.
It's too hot.
Whatever. Now you carry that mindset that, hey, whether I'm here or whether I'm in Mojave Desert and smack dab center of it in the middle of August, and you're not phased. Of course you want to be in the shade in the Mojave with an AC, if you can, with a bottle of water. But you're still unfazed. That's what this path is about. That's where you will be able to distinguish, differentiate between what is pleasure, because pleasure has with it pain. Someone came in to ask the question, and he was in pain. He had lost, there was grief and loss, to the Buddha, and said, why do we suffer? Why do we die? And the Buddha goes, my son, were you born? He says, yeah, what kind of a question is that? He's like, if you're born, you're going to die. If you're born, you're going to suffer. Some of the richest people on the planet, let's pick one. People who live in Buckingham Palace, for example. They've been fed with a golden spoon, diamond encrusted. They had no worries whatsoever in their lives. But really? They had everything that you ever wanted or could want, don't even know that you would want. They have it without even thinking about it. So, but they still suffer. That's what I want to have us go back to and explore. And there's the distinction between pleasure and happiness. Because that individual, even with pain, to some degree, unavoidable pain that is, in meditation, when you go through the deeper layers of understanding as you experience the jhanas, etc., but you go through the insights, you actually will see that, I see the pain, I see the pleasure, but I'm unfazed. Isaac, I hope that...
Yeah.
Thank you, Chandana, for your Dharma talk. You start the lecture with talking about Amazon. Immediately I get attached about that topic. I've been a sentient being. I've been concerned about that topic. How, using Dharma, we can help in such a way to the place where we are living there. I know a little bit about the Amazon issue, and I know that people, even American nuns, they've been killed right there in pro to help to don't make disappear the forest right there. How we can use Dharma to help in such a way what is happening to the earth. I know that the greediness of the people, they want more and more and more. They want to put cows right there to make it grow beef, all that stuff, hamburger around the world. I know basically that is the issue. Now, most of the people probably already know how we, using Dharma, we can help in such a way for the burning in the Amazon at this time.
I always found it interesting that the mind immediately wants to go to find an answer. It doesn't usually stop and question the question. We never question the questioning. Where are we coming with the question from? What is it? Where is it stemming from? Because there is an attachment there, and it's not about what you just said, but there is an attachment in the mind of the person. I want this not to happen. That's the desire. Of course, it's a good desire. It's a good desire not to have the deforestation take place. Countless people, and I'm not even counting the animals. I mean, it has the 10% of biodiversity of the planet. There are plants there that are not found anywhere on the planet. Majority of the plants there, the medicinal qualities of it, have not yet been researched. Every day there was a discovery of over 100 to 160 different types of insects, which biologists didn't ever see before. So there's constantly present, like on the ground for years, biologists who were documenting, capturing these insects and writing them down, taking pictures, etc., etc. Okay, so I get that sense of need, the urgency. However, as far as Dhamma goes, when it starts to boil you up, when you start losing the tranquility of mind, the peacefulness is gone, that means wisdom is out the door already. Yesterday it's gone. That's how fast it happens. And plus, we don't know. We're directing our minds towards the Amazon. I don't even know if the Amazon is in that direction. But let's say. Okay. But the person or persons involved might actually be your neighbor sitting there on, conversing with their partners, investors and all that are dumping the money somewhere in some account that is hiring some people that are doing that. Your neighbor. That could be the possible. I'm not saying that's the case, but...
That's the question. How we target that point?
You can't. Because your finger is pointing at that object. I always tell my patients, you point the finger at this person, this is the person who's giving me sorrow and suffering and lamentation and I can't sleep. And they give me all the reasons and yeah, they're valid. But it's an outside person. That person is not even in the session room. We can't control the other person's behavior. How many fingers are pointing at them? At that person? Isaac, how many?
Probably all.
No. How many finger am I pointing at the person? One. How many fingers are pointing back at me? How many? Look at my hand. How many fingers are pointing back at me? Three. And if I'm very flexible, probably my thumb. So 4. What does that mean? Does that mean I need to stick my head in the sand and say, hey, sorry, Amazon, I'm out of options? Burn. No. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is first and foremost, and this goes with any kind of activism that we need to be involved in to bring about a sense of harmony and peace and justice, equality. What we need to do is first and foremost always make sure our intentions, our drives are coming from a calm state of mind. That's what I would say to your question. So perhaps your question might be tweaked a little, but I understand the gist of it. Yes, it's got a point there. But that's what I would be offering. Always. Because your mind is always going to go outward to fix the world. And that is the best tool that Mara has. Mara, by the way, is the Buddhist equivalent of the devil, Satan, in the Dhamma. We don't have exactly the Satan, but pretty much the guy is very sneaky. The entity or guy, whatever. What do I mean by that? It's very seductive to always want to go outside of you and to try to control the world so that you can find a pleasurable place to live. I want to see greenery in the Amazon. I want to see all the rainforests, beautiful, nothing in... Who wants to see it? I do.
It's about preservation.
It is, but at the same time, when you look at the history of the planet, it's amazing how it can recover. They did this experiment in Costa Rica after the government had deforested. This is, I think, happening in the 60s or 70s. A couple of biologists convinced, actually they paid this orange peeling company, orange juice company, and they bought all of their remainder of the orange peels, truckloads of it, and they came and dumped it in all these areas in Costa Rica. And there's even footage of this on these deforested areas that people said it's impossible for it to recover. Impossible. It's gone forever. And because of some legal issues, this and that, and biologists, I think they were not even Costa Rican, I'm not sure. So anyhow, they were pulled off of the site. They couldn't go back for about 10, 15 years. Then they go back. Everybody's blown away with the fact, oh, is this the same place? Trees. Howling monkeys. All kinds of monkeys, all kinds of birds. Toucans, the birds. All kinds of foliage have returned. So But again, what was the driving force? It's like this fear. And remember, we are living in confused times where we are constantly being fed worrisome, fearsome thoughts, which does what perfectly every single time? Does this to the mind. Wisdom is out the door. And that's what I'm saying. Dhamma allows you to come back to this. And from there, you can do anything. That's your priority, in my opinion, to my understanding. But because our time is up, I can answer it right after the sermon.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I know this is a very important subject. But before I stop, just quickly, I have been given the need. I've been trying to do my part in preserving the Dhamma. What I've been doing is basically reciting the suttas one at a time and trying to bring them into YouTube. So now I'm glad to say that I have been able to do that with the Udana and Itivuttaka, which are two classics of the Pali Canon, and it's fully up on YouTube completely with all the verses and an introduction. I'm doing now the work on the Dhammapada, and it's almost halfway done. There's 423 verses. So I'm like on 170 something. Every single one has to be done separately. So that, and I'm also doing the Majjhima Nikaya, etc. So things are being done, but your job at that point, and you've asked me this before, how can we keep studying? Well, the books themselves are very voluminous. They're very thick and they can be intimidating. But I'm trying to make it easier for you. You can just hit play on YouTube, hit play, and you would listen to it, the whole thing, in your car or working out, whatever. So that way you can also contribute to the preservation. So I hope that helps.